Okay, we continue our series on Stoicism by going through the Enchiridion by Epictetus in the translation How to be Free by Professor A.A. Long. And we have made it to chapter 39, an interesting short one, which is what she said. The body is the proper measure for each person's acquisitive needs, just as the foot is the measure for a shoe. If you stick to this rule, you will keep the measure, but if you go beyond it, you are bound in the end to go over a cliff, so to speak. It's the same with the shoe if you exceed the foot. First comes a gilded shoe, and next one embroidered with purple. Once you exceed the measure, there is no limit. Now, sometimes things are a lot simpler than they seem. I read that and I kept thinking about what is he trying to say? What is the analogy? What is the shoe? What is the body? But I think he's really talking about the body. So here's what I did then. I like to then look at another translation. So I went to another classic translation of the Discourses and the Enchiridion by Oldfather, and in which the English is a little bit outdated here and there, but the translation is really solid. So he writes this translation: each man's body is a measure for his property, just as the foot is a measure for his shoe. If then you abide by this principle, you will maintain the proper measure. But if you go beyond it, you cannot help but fall headlong over a precipice, as it were, in the end. So also in the case of your shoe, if once you go beyond the foot, you get first a gilded shoe, then a purple one, then an embroidered one. For once you go beyond the measure, there is no limit. And he adds to this this footnote. So that applies to the first sentence. Each man's body is a measure for his property. That is, property, which is of use only for the body, should be adjusted to man's actual bodily needs, just as a shoe is, or at least should be adjusted to the actual needs of a man's foot. Well, that was a lot simpler than I thought. So how could we interpret this? Well, this really ties in to one of the four cardinal virtues. Temperance. In other words, moderation. Everything in moderation. The Stoic sage does everything in moderation, right? And that's, I think, a very important virtue to think about, right? Because I don't want to sound sort of hippie-esque, but we do live in a time of pretty large excesses, right? We see this a lot. I remember a couple of years ago, there was in Dutch politics, there was a politician who was she was on holiday in Italy, and she was recalled for an emergency debate, okay, in Parliament. She had to be there. And what happened was that she booked a private jet to fly to the Netherlands from Italy. And especially some leftist parties got wind of that and said, what the hell were you thinking? And she said, well, I had to. There were no other planes available. And then the opposition said, well, have you ever heard of a train? Right? And I remember that was quite a debate. Now, what I'm trying to get at is that, and again, I don't really want to get into this whole argument of it's kind of, what do you call that? It's very much overdone, I think. Like, it's consumerism and capitalism and all that stuff. But it is hard to deny that we live in a society that is a bit excessive, where there is always the next thing for you to purchase, the next thing for you to pursue, the next thing for you to obtain. We continuously replace our cell phones, even though they are perfectly functional, but the new model has come out. We need a bigger car, we need a better house, we need this and this and that, we need such and such brands of clothes, we do need a Canada Goose jacket, even though another jacket may give you the exact same heat properties. But again, I know I'm exaggerating a bit here, but But I do think that realistically we can relate to this, right? We live in a society where that is very much appreciated, but is also encouraged. We're encouraged to continuously look for things that are better, that are bigger, that, you know, work better, that you know, and if it's really a matter of, well, it really works better, that's one thing, but I think very often it does not. I do not think that the one newest generation of phone is going to outdo your old phone, in which was maybe one generation back, in such a magnificent matter that you need to spend the $1,000 on that new phone so that you can now take pictures of chickens in better focus, or, you know, etc. So I kind of object to that way, but that is the way our society works, and it puts all kinds of values and norms on us, and we are very much encouraged to continuously do these things, to do engage in these excesses, and do have this and do buy that. But in reality, you don't have to do just that. You can also choose to not do that, right? And I think Epictetus here has a nice way of putting it, right? The body is the proper measure for each person's acquisitive needs. In other words, you only need those clothes that really fit your body, right? That cover up your body, just as the foot is the measure for a shoe. And you can go to more and more and more elaborate shoes, but in the end it will not really get you a whole lot, right? They're still just shoes. And whether it is a $30 shoe or a $300 shoe or a $3,000 shoe, it is still a shoe. Now, of course, ironic that this is coming from someone who reviews fountain pens, which is a clear example of a luxury product that people buy out of a sense of luxury. There is always the argument that I get once every few months from a random viewer who has not watched any of my other videos, but who stumbles upon them and says, yeah, well, my $1 big ballpoint does the exact same thing. Well, it doesn't, for a number of reasons I won't go into now, but the basic argument is, but both write, and that is true. Both pens will write. It's interesting that the Stoics... let me rephrase that. The Stoics occupy an interesting position in this whole debate. Because on the one hand, you have people like the Cynics, right? Another school of philosophy. The Cynics were very respected by, for example, Epictetus. Zeno was initially trained by a Cynic, right? Crates of Thebes. And the Cynics were ascetics. They only owned the clothes they wore. They had a little knapsack with some stuff. They begged for money, a very austere type of life. They slept on the ground. They slept where they could. They didn't want any property. They didn't want any money. So they were very ascetic, right? On the other hand, you have people like the Epicureans, who are, I think, often misinterpreted, who do not say, to sort of paraphrase this in modern terms, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, engage in whatever you want. That is not what the Epicureans say, but they did say you can enjoy good food, you can enjoy sex, you can enjoy all kinds of pleasurable activities in life, right? That's a good thing, within moderation, but it is a good thing. Now the Stoics kind of say something a little similar. They say, well, you know, you have to be careful that you don't get carried away by whatever it is you're doing, pursuing pleasurable activities, but you don't really have to avoid all these things, like what the Cynics say. Right? Take someone like Seneca. Seneca is considered a Stoic, wrote a lot of things, but Seneca was an investment banker. If he would have lived today, probably would have been a billionaire. Not a millionaire, a billionaire. And a lot of people say, well, it's really easy to say why you should be a Stoic when you have that much money and you can do whatever you want, you have absolutely no financial worries. I don't think that's necessarily an unfair argument, but Seneca had some interesting things to say. But it's important to realize that the Stoics say, yeah, but there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. We do not say you cannot have money, you cannot have possessions. Just be sensible about it. Everything in moderation. Well, Seneca made a lot of money, so you could ask whether that was really in moderation. But a lot of people, like Epictetus, they did do things in moderation. It's clear from the way they described their lives, they were described the way they lived. They did things in moderation. And I think that comes from all the way back from Zeno being trained by a cynic. And as I said, the cynics were ascetics, so they did not care about possessions and all that stuff. So I think Zeno kind of made that a little bit more palatable by saying, well, I don't know if Zeno himself said that, but I mean his followers, the Stoic school, said this. Well, you can pursue these things, you can pursue certain pleasures in life and certain nice things in life, but within moderation. It cannot be at the cost of virtue. Virtue you must pursue, because otherwise you can't be happy. Anything else could be a bonus, but a preferred indifferent or dispreferred indifferent, right? You can try to avoid illness, and that's probably wise, but you may still get sick. So you have to be indifferent towards it because it is indifferent towards your pursuit of virtue. You can pursue money, but not at the cost of virtue. That would be wrong, right? So everything in moderation. And that should be pretty obvious, but it's not. I think in our modern day society, being moderate, being modest, both interesting things, not the same thing, but related things. I don't think either of those things they come natural to people anymore. I think people need to be told once in a while that you have to be a little careful about how you do things, right? And that was an important reason for me, if we come back to pens, that was an important reason for me to bring back an accumulation of pens from a few hundred pens to about 20 pens. That's still excessive, you only need one pen. But I like to tell myself, yeah, it's all a little different nibs, different filling systems, different brands, different materials. Well, that's the number of pens that I like to use and like to own. And much more than that, it makes me nervous. Because again, everything in moderation. I don't want 1,000 pens. I don't judge you if you do, but for me that is not moderation. So that won't work for me, right? And that's it. So, I hope this was useful. I hope this has given you some food for thought. And I'm glad to see you next week when we talk about Stoicism some more. Bye.